It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, it's been an incredible week for all of us, and certainly for this country, with the failed assassination attempt of Donald Trump, followed by the appointment of J.D. Vance for his vice president, and now we're experiencing the Republican convention. I do want to talk about the assassination attempt through the lens of a political conversation. Do you feel like that kind of thing still has impact in American politics? I know that Jerry Ford survived two while he was president. It didn't seem to help him, at least in the election.
You know, it does leave your head sort of spinning, the number of things that are happening, and I have to say that absent some of the other things that are occurring, it probably would have a greater impact. I was a young White House staffer in 1981, sitting in the Roosevelt room of the White House when somebody rushed in and told us there'd been a shooting. And of course, President Reagan's condition was far more serious. But even before that, just the fact that it had happened, we initially thought he was returning to the White House. It just upends everything. I mean, it is kind of all-consuming, and so I think there was this sort of gasp nationally that how could this have happened, and yet Trump hops on Air Force One and is at his national convention just 48 hours later, and so it's hard to it's hard to compute. It's tragic on many levels. It's tragic for the country that anybody got that close to a former president, to a candidate for president. It looks like a young man deeply disturbed and depressed got his hands on a weapon and was trying to make news for himself. And yet that's the very thing that the Secret Service is there to protect against. I saw this morning calls for the director to step down. And it seems likely to me that will happen. There's going to be a lot of investigation going on. I think one of the things I'm most interested in hearing are some of the, if we ever get a chance to hear them, is some of the radio traffic. Was the question, what did they know? When did they know it? Because right now there's a lot of speculation about what they knew and when they knew it, but that's not for sure. You would typically, I think, politically, expect some kind of a bump, some sort of a kind of a sympathetic, if you will, increase in support. I do think it depends a lot on how Trump handles this. The preview of the speech tonight, Thursday night, is that he's rewritten it. He's had a change of heart. This has really affected him. We'll see. And if we see it tonight, I say give it a week, because it's not at all clear to me that he's really capable of getting himself on another path. And I know we want to talk about J.D. Vance, but I think the fact of the matter is that because he went to the convention, because he's now picked somebody as his vice presidential choice who carries a whole lot of things with him, pro and con, it seems to me like we're moving past this. To answer your question, and events are unfolding very rapidly, and then probably the next one's going to be what President Biden does.
Al, what's your take?
Well, first of all, absolutely condemn the idea of an assassination attempt against Donald Trump. It's awful. It's horrible. We're supposed to solve our political problems at the ballot box, not with a bullet. And we don't know yet what this young man's motive was, but it's just horrific, and it does reflect a lot of the tone of politics in the last 10 years. But I sort of have three main observations about what's happened over the last week. One, is this has been a stable election for a year. And to be honest with you, I don't think it changed the fundamentals at all. I mean, maybe Trump had a deathbed conversion and will become a nice, kind man. But I suspect, as Craig said, give him a week at most. The second thing is that his picking J.D. Vance indicates something that I found really interesting. It continues his strategy of doubling down on the MAGA base. He had the opportunity to pick somebody who might give him a little more reach in places where he needs help, but he decided to go with somebody who was, a young Trump wannabe. I won't say he's a clone because I don't. He seems to be a pretty changeable fellow over his short political career. And the third observation I'd like to make, and I'm happy to talk about any of these in as much detail as you want, but I think this is really important. Trump's strategy is highly dependent on Joe Biden being the Democratic nominee. And if Biden steps aside, as I believe he will, I think it's possible he will not be the nominee by the time this airs this afternoon. The Democrats put up a new generation candidate. I think Trump is going to find himself in big political trouble. I'm happy to explain all of those things as we go on, but rather than give you a long monologue, I throw those three ideas out. And just to very quickly say, I mean, Trump is the same guy was before he was shot. It doesn't change the fact that, I doubt the shooting will transform him into a saint. It doesn't change the fact that he's convicted 34 times, that he's been found guilty of sexual assault and fraud, he's still a rascal, that he's been indicted for leading an insurrection against the country. And as David French pointed out, who's a former, I think, George W. Bush speechwriter, it also doesn't change the fact that nobody over the last 10 years has lowered the standard for political dialogue and raised the specter of political violence as much as Donald Trump has. The other thing it doesn't change is his program for the future, where he says he's going to, he's going to terminate the Constitution, have retribution against his political enemies, and follow the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 blueprint, which is a pile of extremist ideas. So I'd say real quickly that this campaign isn't over. And if the Democrats can make this campaign a referendum on Trump, which Biden cannot do, they can still win it. The second thing, I felt sorry for Craig last night when I listened to J.D. Vance. I mean, there's a wonderful piece in the Atlantic by Tim Alberta that talks about Trump's strategy. And his get out the vote strategy, which is the basis of his campaign, is not to go after Craig and the Republicans who always vote. He doesn't care about Republican voting lists. It's to find more Trumpers. They are convinced that there are more hidden Trumpers who don't participate, and everything they do is to try to get those voters out. And on the basis of his first two campaigns, you got to say that worked pretty well. But when I heard J.D. Vance last night, and, when he was in fourth grade, Joe Biden voted for NAFTA. Well, you know who negotiated NAFTA? Craig's boss, George H.W. Bush, and the negotiator was a dear friend of all of us, the late Bill Brock of, who lived in Annapolis, and he did it. Then he went after PNTR China, opening the trade with China started with Nixon. I mean, it was a Republican thing. The final thing he said was that when he was, I don't know how old he was, he did grow older, and he said, then Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War. Well, I don't know, but I do think it was George W. Bush's war. So I said, Craig and I we were emailing a little bit last night, but I mean, it's not his party anymore. And they made that absolutely clear. And then the final just quick point is, basically the Trump strategy, and it's been very successful, has been to have Macho Man Trump, and that's why that great iconic photo of him really fit it after he was shot, against this old, weak, feeble Joe Biden. And Biden helped him by his debate. I mean, he basically confirmed that strategy. And the strategy has worked. It's made Biden unelectable, and I can talk about that if you want. But what it has done is it's been too successful. It's going to drive Biden out of the race. We're going to get a young Democratic candidate from the next generation. I don't know who it will be. Maybe Vice President Harris, but it could also be one of the many Democratic governors, and somebody who can sort of press the case against Trump that Biden couldn't, that I outlined earlier, and he can turn that election around. So here's my what I say to the Republicans: be careful what you ask for.
Craig, I want to get into this Biden decision that I think Al suggested might come as quick as this afternoon. This is a difficult process for staff and for a candidate. You've been in those moments before. What's going on, you think, in Joe Biden's world?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Al publicly for his compassion. My wife and I discovered it's much easier to watch this convention if you put it on mute. But to your question, two things I think, and I alluded to one last week, I guess, and that is people reach a point where they conclude they have to take the keys away, usually from a parent. And if they actually have to press the point of taking the keys away, by definition, there's an argument of sorts. And the person who's no longer capable of driving insists they're a perfectly good driver, but eventually usually relent and provide their keys. I think that's where they are with Biden. I think the strategy of trying to reason with the president that he needs to step back is really not working. I mean, because he doesn't believe that. And you're really going to have to get a group to go to him and say, the time is now. I do think as one person said, the walls are closing in. I would say the pressure is building. You have a leader of the Senate. You have the former Speaker of the House. The other one is you have his campaign chairman says, we're beginning to run out of funds. So it seems to me that it has to come to an end. But for people who have run for office, I had the good experience for me of chairing California Governor Pete Wilson's presidential campaign. And he'd raised, in his races for the governorship and for the Senate in California, he raised the millions and millions of dollars he needed. He never had trouble raising money. He actually wanted to be president. I think he would have made a great president. But he could not raise the money. He said he wouldn't run for president, and his funding just wasn't there. And it was kind of Bob Dole's turn in the Republican Party. But the hardest person to convince that it wouldn't work was Pete Wilson. And his chief of staff knew it. His close friends knew it. I knew it. And I was the one who went to him and said, there is no path forward. And it's a hard conversation to have. And I think these longstanding relationships that Biden has had with Democratic leaders makes it even more difficult for them. But it's clear that the staff is, just almost, I would think, paralyzed. Senior staff are putting the best face on it that they can, but it's becoming, more and more difficult to raise the funds. We've talked about that here before. I think that ultimately, takes away the opportunity, and it also, if there's some light at the end of the tunnel, it's this conversation you're beginning to hear that Biden is now looking to understand, can Kamala Harris win, and that some would say that suggests he's more open. I don't know whether he's more open or not, but I do think that going to come to a conclusion. And I also think, as we talked last week, that's going to create a whole lot of excitement in the Democratic Party. And I completely agree with Al. This this Republican Party, as it exists today with Donald Trump, is making virtually no effort to broaden the base. This convention is a celebration for the believers. In a strange way, J.D. Vance might have reached out more broadly with his remarks last night, and his wife certainly did. She was probably the most appealing speaker in the group because of the way she, told us about him. She left out a few important parts, but she certainly presented a very compelling image of who he is and what he believes. So I think in this strange election, the Trump Republican Party is moving as far as it can into Trump land, and the Democrats may just turn it upside down with a new with a presidential nominee and a vice presidential nominee that look a lot different than they do right now.
Al, the since you were speculating on when Biden might make a decision, do you feel like he would want to do this and basically appoint Harris as his replacement?
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I am not in his inner circle, and that inner circle is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. It's now down to family and maybe one or two other longtime aides. But look, what happened to Joe Biden, in one sense, it's very tragic and sad. I mean, he got old, and we are old. I'm old. I'm the same age he is. And, he in the family has come, the Democratic family, and said, you can't drive anymore. And that is an irreversible problem. You never get younger. And I went through it with my father. When you start to slip mentally, it can get on you pretty fast. And I think most people feel that that he can't serve another 4 years. And the opposition has been mounting. With the reports last night that Schumer went to Rehoboth and told him that the Senate, most of the senators wanted him to get out. My understanding and reading of the House, from talking to a few insiders, is that more than 2/3 of the House caucus wanted him to get off the ticket. So, in terms of the political leadership, it was gone. I think, but yesterday there were two polls. And the other important thing is that Nancy Pelosi, who is probably from Baltimore, whose father and brother were mayor of Baltimore, and knows a little bit about politics, probably the best politician in the Democratic Party, is said to be leading this and orchestrating it. I thought it was really interesting that her sort of her protege Adam Schiff, at the very time it looked like these discussions about pushing Biden were about ready to shut down, came out and changed that dynamic very quickly. Somebody said you don't bet against Nancy in the Democratic Party or anywhere, but but there were also two polls yesterday that were really critical. Actually, there were three. I mean, there was the one in that a big Democratic fundraising group did that said actually the four candidates who would do the best were Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer, and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, who was a former astronaut. All of them, but everybody they tested ran better than Biden in the swing states. But there were two other polls that I think really made the difference. One was an AP NORC poll that showed more than two-thirds of the voters wanted Biden out, and I think only 16% of Democrats said he should remain our nominee. That sort of blows the idea that this is an elitist deal, and that it was rank and file are all behind him. But the second one, I saw John King talk about this, and I emailed him in the middle of the night, Monday night, and he sent me a chart. It was a poll that was done by a group that's a bunch of universities in the West and Yale, which is not in the West. Just want to make sure that people understand I'm that much with it. In the New York Times, it's done by YouGov, which is a pretty reliable polling firm, and it was of 7 swing states. It had Biden behind in all of them, and most significantly. And the thing, I think I talked about this last week. When people decide they're not going to vote for you because you're too old, they're not going to vote for you unless they're a real Biden supporter. You got to, and I think I suggested last week that what this has done to Biden, what the debate did to Biden, was put a ceiling on him that is basically at his approval rating. And what this poll showed is that in all 7, and particularly in the three states that he has to win, that he can't, if he has any chance, which are Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, he's not only running about 40%, but his vote in those states is within 1 point of his approval rating. So in effect, it's a ceiling on Biden. Trump's advantage, Trump's big liability is that he has always had a low ceiling. So unless something goes to break Trump's ceiling, a Democrat who does not have Biden's low ceiling is going to be in pretty good shape.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al, from Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.